Welcome back to English 101, Rhetoric 1. This is week 4, and this is our rhetoric and writing lecture. And we're going to talk about something I love to talk about, but I will try to keep it to minimum, even though I enjoy talking about this. I think this is one of the most useful things. Maybe the writing process, I said last week, is one of the most useful things in a writing class, but I really feel like these are interesting, and you see it all around you once you start noticing it, at least in my experience. So let's look at basic appeals. In other words, when I'm trying to convince you or persuade you, just like I was just doing, actually, I was trying to convince you this is interesting, and I might appeal to you in different ways. And I can do this by using my emotions or your emotions. I can do this by using authority or trust, and I could do this by using just good reasons or logic. So let's talk about, and there's other ways too, but these are what are called the basic appeals. In other words, these are appeals that have been being used for thousands of years to try to persuade people in many different languages across cultures, societies. They've withstood the test of time in a sense because we're still using them. And people like Aristotle and Plato and all these ancient Greeks used them, and we're still doing it. So let's look at that just a little bit. All right. So we talked a little bit in the reading video this week about critical reading, textual analysis. So then we're also going to talk about annotation and avoiding logical fallacies. These are all part of academic reading. But we're just talking about these two parts this week. We'll come back to these two probably next week or the following week. So we did talk about this again in the reading video, but just a reminder, critical reading is all about asking good questions, and textual analysis is how we look at texts, different kinds of texts. We're looking mostly at essays and short stories and journal articles. But how you evaluate how you're being persuaded, how somebody's trying to persuade you, or how you might try to persuade someone. That's what we're going to focus on here, is these appeals and trying to understand how someone might try to influence you. So let's look at the three basic appeals. Again, ethos, logos, and pathos. We're going to talk about each one of these. If you want to read about them, they're in the Harbrace book, pages 34 to 35, and then again separately on pages 43 to 44, they talk about the appeals. So the first one we'll talk about is ethos. It's often called the ethical appeal. And if you notice, it looks a lot like the word ethical. When we say ethical, I think a lot of times people sort of assume we're talking about just somebody who follows the rules, who's moral, who's good, whatever. But this is really talking about trust. When we think of ethos, we're talking about, I always like to say, when I use ethos, I'm kind of saying, come on, you know me, you trust me, you believe me, something like that. But it will often, as a reader, you might look for a person trying to establish common ground. Sometimes this might be a little cringy, to use a kind of a modern way of talking about it. But if somebody's trying too hard to kind of like sometimes I know at my age, if I'm trying to kind of get too much common ground with a teenager, it doesn't always work, right? It's much easier to do with somebody my own age because we've shared all these different experiences. But it doesn't have to be that. But I'm giving that as an example. But you might sometimes feel somebody trying to establish that common ground with you as a reader. You're reading something, or just reading the world, right? You're looking out at the world. You're in class. You're listening to something like what I'm sharing now, and you're thinking, is the teacher trying to establish like a common ground with me? And if they are, then they're probably trying to build their ethos. And ethos is, again, trustworthiness. We do this in lots of different ways in writing. But it's the way the writer can maybe demonstrate knowledge of something. If somebody shows me that they know a lot about what they're talking about, I tend to be more likely to trust them. If somebody shows me that they don't know what they're talking about, for whatever reason, if I believe that, I'm going to be less likely to believe them, and so that they haven't really built their ethos well. The problem is different people respond to different things, right? So there's not really a one size fits all, and that's why we always go back to thinking about your audience. Sometimes a writer will share biographical information. They'll tell you something personal about themselves as a way to kind of build that ethos too. As a writer, what you want to try to do, so this is probably the more relevant part. Each one of these I'm going to talk about what you can look for as a reader, and then as a writer, what you can do. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples, so hopefully this won't be too abstract by the time we get done with this video. But as a writer, show goodwill towards your audience. You're like, a lot of people think, how can I really show goodwill in writing? A lot of it has to do with the tone you take, the vocabulary you choose, that you're careful, so actually just having good grammar and everything being neat and orderly is a kind of, to me, that's building ethos. If I get a resume, I used to be in a job where I had to hire a lot of people, and I had to read a lot of resumes, and I had that in several different jobs, and I can tell you, whenever you get a resume that looks like the person took like 30 seconds to put it together, oftentimes that's the difference in if you have another person who's almost equally qualified, but their resume is really nice, at least, correct and everything, you're more likely probably as a hiring person. Every job is different. That might not always be true, but it's just an example of, as a writer, I see it as the writer who's careful is showing goodwill toward the audience. Establish good sense or good knowledge. Now, this is how you present your ideas, I think, mostly in writing, and how you give good reasons. So if you're arguing for a point and you give really good reasons that make really good sense, then you're building ethos, right? You're getting that trust from your reader. Demonstrate good character. Again, this is kind of like the goodwill, but if it's a personal essay, you might demonstrate good character or values or common values with who you think your audience is in different ways, even by sharing stories. So that's the ethical appeal. Again, I always think of it as trust. You could think of it as character. Years and years ago in schools, they had this movement called character counts. And I always think of that when I look at this. It's this idea of believing and trusting in somebody, that they have your maybe best interest in mind. Here's an example of how it might look in writing. So ethos. A lot of times you'll see somebody when they want to establish ethos, you believe me, you trust me, they give you their title sometimes. As a doctor, I'm qualified to tell you that this course of treatment will likely generate the best results. So they add that to the beginning of the sentence to establish some credibility, we might call it. Or they're building their ethos. In my years as a Marine, if it taught me anything, it's that caution is the best policy. So here we are in a very dangerous situation. The fact that this person was a Marine might be very relevant because they were in a lot of dangerous or stressful situations. They might be able to help us out of this one. You know me, literally, like somebody you actually know personally. I've taught Sunday school at your church for years, babysat your children, and served as playground director. So I can run your preschool. So they're applying for this job maybe to run the preschool, and they deploy ethos. They basically want to be trusted. And so this is, again, a couple of examples of how ethos might look in writing. So lots of times we do bring in an outside source, somebody who's a trusted or an expert in the subject to build the trust and the credibility of our ideas in our paper. The logical appeal, or what's called logos, and you might say that looks a lot like the word logos. I think in Greek it literally means the word. So we're giving you some ideas about things. We're sharing important words, but good reasons. That's really what we're looking here with logos. And logos, to me, is the most important thing you can do in an academic paper. Ethos is good. We're going to talk about pathos, which is emotion, later. But if you have good reasons, you can be lacking a lot on your ethos or your pathos, and you still have a good paper. So this is probably the heart and the core and the soul of a good paper, is to have lots of good reasons for why your thesis statement is true or believable. Evidence, examples, statistics, comparison, facts, right? That all sounds like academic writing, maybe a little more than our previous slide, ethos, did. Trustworthiness is still important, so you want to draw on good evidence and good sources. The best way to do that in our situation is to use the library databases if you possibly can, or we have free subscriptions to the New York Times. That's a verifiable, those are good sources. Anything that's like a major journalistic source, or again, the library databases are excellent because they have all kinds of peer-reviewed stuff there. So finding these good reasons and looking for that when you're reading, but then as a writer trying to demonstrate your own reasoning skills and using those good reasons to support your claim. So logos is all about logic, like this is a good reason, step by step, why we should do this. And again, that's going to be very important when you're writing an academic paper of any kind for any subject. I think most subjects are going to want people to be logical and orderly in their writing. So good reasons demonstrates effective use of reason and judicious use of evidence, using your evidence carefully. Here's just a couple of examples. Imagine the courtroom scene and the lawyer steps up and says, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have not only the fingerprints, the lack of an alibi, a clear motive, and an expressed desire to commit the robbery, we have video of the suspect." That seems like an open and shut case, right? So reasons, that's logos, that's logic. It's a matter of common sense that people deserve to be treated equally. The Constitution calls it self-evident. Why then should I have been denied a seat because of my disability? So somebody's explaining it's not logical in the country we live in that somebody should be denied something because of a disability. You won't find any deer along this road. You're looking for deer, you're out sightseeing or something. I don't know. In 25 years of driving the same route, I haven't seen a single one. So that's just precedent, right? This has never happened. I've been driving that road for 25 years, so it's just a good reason why you wouldn't see that. So here's a couple. Those are a couple of examples of how you might see that in real life. Last one, pathos. Pathos is emotion, and if you look at the word path here, this part of the word, core of this word here, it's a lot like the word sympathy, empathy, pathetic, right? All these words that have to do with emotion and feeling. And pathos is all about emotion. Now, a lot of writers think, oh, academic writing is kind of boring. I can't bring passion or emotion to that. That's not really true. In fact, some of the best academic writing is because the people do have a passion about that subject. It's different than you might do in a novel or a poem or something, but you can still bring emotion into writing. You use a language that's designed to stir the emotions, and as a reader, you can kind of look for that. You can also look for the way the writer is trying to try to build connections with you and kind of invoke shared values. And this can be used in a very, you can really manipulate people with this. And I think you don't have to look too far. Look too far in our world today to see how people are using emotion, in politics, advertising, different places to try to kind of manipulate people. So it can be a very bad thing, but it can also be used in a really good way in academic writing as well. As a writer, don't try to manipulate the feelings, but you engage the feelings. That may sound like a very subtle distinction, but there is a difference between, as you know, right, between manipulating people and just engaging with them, right, and trying to be genuine in what you're doing. Establishing empathy, that's easier said than done, right? But if you can do that through your writing, that's going to be a very powerful connection into this thing called pathos. Remember, these are called the 3 basic appeals, and that's because each one, we're trying to appeal to sort of a different part of our audience, a different part of, that each person has this. We all have emotions. We all care about, our reputations and our trustworthiness among our group or our friends. And we all, are logical. So we have all these things going on, and each one of these appeals is kind of hitting. And if you can use all of these in one paper, it really can make your argument very powerful. And let's look at just a couple of examples of how pathos might look in academic writing, or like in a more realistic context here. If we don't move soon, we're all going to die. That's very emotional, right? It's pathos. But in the right context, that could be good, because if we were in a burning building or something, and you don't want to kind of sit around and go, well, building's on fire, maybe and then everything collapses, right? You want to go fast. So pathos can be a really good thing in the right context. This is more like a real life situation, not in writing. I'm not just invested in this community. I love, so there we have a kind of a word that connects to emotion, pathos. I love every building, every business, every hardworking member of this town. So again, we're responding to that kind of common ground. I really care about this place. I'm personally invested in it, and so on. Maybe a politician or somebody in a public position of authority making a speech. You'll make the right decision because you have something that not many people do. You have a heart. Speaking directly to someone, kind of complimenting them, can often be using pathos and using emotion. So ethos, pathos, logos. These are what we call the 3 basic appeals. And again, as you can imagine, these go back to ancient Greece. That's why the words maybe sound a little different, because they're very ancient concepts and probably drawn from the Greek language. Let's look at a couple of quick examples here, and then I'll try to wrap this video up for you guys. This is, I'm sure most everybody remembers, maybe not everybody, but you might have seen the old cartoons of Warner Brothers where you have the Wile E. Coyote, and he's always chasing the Roadrunner, right? And he used to order all of his stuff from this company called Acme. So in this, we're imagining that Mr. Coyote is now the spokesperson for Acme Gizmotronics. And down here he says, and I always think Acme is kind of like the precursor to Amazon. I feel like Jeff Bezos is probably sitting on his sofa one day watching cartoons, and he's like, wow, they really got that stuff fast to the Coyote. I wonder if I could do that. No, I'm just kidding. If you guys know who Jeff Bezos is, the head of Amazon, just kidding. But our spokesperson, Mr. Coyote, says, I'm not really a coyote, but I play one on TV. I've used Acme products for years. Their slingshots, rocket launchers, crowbars, pogo sticks, and power pills are the best around. And don't forget their high-powered dynamite. I buy everything from Acme. They are the company that I trust. That's an important word if you guys are looking at this. I trust, right? So Mr. Coyote here is using one of our basic appeals. He's using ethos, pathos, or logos. Maybe a little bit of a combination, but mainly using one. So if you wanted to just pause the video for a second, read through this, and see if you could decide, is Mr. Coyote trying to persuade us that we should maybe use Acme products because of ethos. You know me, you trust me, you've seen me. Pathos, emotions, or logos. I'm giving you good reasons to trust me. So maybe pause the video, and when we come back, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, he's using ethos. He's basically saying, you know me, you trust me. We see this all the time in the media where a famous celebrity, I saw, I can't think of, Simone Biles, I think, is the gymnast. She popped up in a commercial I noticed. Well, I see her pretty often. She's in a lot of commercials. And so, she's a famous sports figure, just like many famous sports figures, and then they show up in commercials, and it's an ethos-driven thing. We know her, we trust her, we like her maybe, and then that makes us want to maybe buy the product. At least that's what the company's hoping when they pay a celebrity to endorse their product. All right, here's another one. Same thing. We're still Acme, and now we're talking about Acme in a slightly different way. Here's an example of what Acme is selling. They're doing this process to produce energy, and they basically tell us we need a clean source of energy, right, in the world. It's a big problem. They're worried in Europe right now that they're not going to have enough energy to get through the winter or whatever's going on in the world, right? We could say that. Our energy source is clean, safe, and powerful. The world will soon have an excellent source of clean energy. We just use this dihydrocesium process, our reactors. Sounds like nuclear power, right? So what are they doing here? They're trying to persuade us that we should, really get into Acme and buy our energy from them. Here's a typical example of what it looks like when they release that energy. What are they doing here? What are they giving us? So again, if you want to pause this for a minute and think about, is this ethos? You know us, you trust us, you care about us, or believe us, or is it logic, good reasons? Here's a good reason, here's another good reason, or is it pathos? It's emotional. All right, if you went away or if you didn't, that's fine. I think this is an example of logos because they're giving us good reasons. We need clean energy. With this little reactor, we can have all kinds of clean energy. They even tell us down here that we can use it in airplanes, houses, almost anything that needs it. Acme batteries will have these tiny little dihydrocesium reactors, a tiny little reactor on your, if you had a watch or a set of headphones or whatever. So it's giving us good reasons, and that's logos. So this is more of a logos-based approach. And finally, the last one, the Roadrunner is not anywhere to be seen here. We're still talking about Acme. And we talk about a baby turtle. A cute little baby turtle comes out of its leathery shell, of its egg, catches its first glimpse of, I wish I had a little piano music in the background here, but I don't. First sunrise. It pauses a moment to rest, unaware of the danger. And then the water draws closer, the nest is torn to bits in a terrible explosion, destroying even more of an endangered species. Why does this happen? One name, Acme. And then it goes on to more about how their nuclear process is destroying all these lands and all these animals. And it says, don't let them get away with it, exclamation mark. Boycott all Acme products, exclamation mark. And call your representatives and tell them you support stricter legislation to prevent things like this, exclamation mark. So if you want to pause it, we only have one left, so it's pretty easy, one of each, right? But what do you think this is? What's going on here? If you did pause or didn't, it's emotion, right? So it's pathos. So we had ethos, pathos, logos, all trying to promote the same thing. They're trying to promote this Acme company, but they're doing it in a very different way. These are just basic appeals. And I want to just sort of quiz you with a couple more, and then we are done. So let's take a look at these sentences on the next page. And if you want to, again, pause it, write down what you think. You should see an example of each on each screen. You'll see an ethos, a pathos, and a logos. You just have to decide which is which. If you want to write down your answers and then check them, I'll give you the answers in just a minute. Let's look at the first one. So here's our first three examples. So again, if you want to take a couple minutes, read through these and decide. One should be ethos, one should be logos, and one should be pathos, each one. So if you pause it or you didn't, here we are. If you're still watching, good for you. Private demand for the product has tapered off for the past 3 years, and this year's sales figures are at an all-time low. It's time to research other options. We're in a sales meeting, and the person leading the meeting maybe says, hey, our sales figures are down. We're not selling this stuff. It's not working. We need to look into other options. Maybe change the product or change our marketing. So what do you think? Yeah, it's logos. Good logical reasoning, because if we were selling a lot of this stuff, we wouldn't have to change. But I'm giving you a good reason why we should change. Okay, so logos, using good reasons, logic. Better men than us have fought and died to preserve this great nation. Now is I should probably scream this, but I'm not going to. Now is our turn to return the favor for God and country, gentlemen, exclamation mark. So we're in a foxhole, and I'm telling you, hey, we got to get out of here. Let's go. And I'm motivating you with pathos. It's emotion. It's not like a logical thing. It's an emotional thing. And that's what we're doing here. And the last one, we only have one left, so you can guess, but he's a forensics and ballistics expert for the federal government. If anyone's qualified to determine the murder weapon, it's him. He's an expert. We can trust him. We believe him because he's got this training. And so that is an example of ethos. I had to think for a second. Okay, ethos. So we've got up here at the top, we've got an example of logos, using good reasons, pathos, emotion, and then ethos, believability, trustability, something like that. We could say that. Okay, there we go. Logos, pathos, ethos. All right, one more set here, and we are done for this week. Our experience in roofing contracting is evidenced not only by our 50 years in business, our staff of qualified technicians, but in the decades of satisfied customers who have come to expect nothing but the best. You can pause it if you want to think about it, but if you come back, or if you didn't, it is ethos, right? You trust us. We've been in business for 50 years. That's a long time to be in business, so you can definitely trust us. So this is ethos. The data is perfectly clear. The data is clear. The numbers, the information we have. This investment has consistently turned a profit year over year in spite of market declines in other areas. So even though you're probably worried about the stock market, this thing has been solid for many years. It's okay. We've got data, reasons, good reasons why you should invest in this. Maybe it's some investment person trying to convince you to invest in this. And it's logos, good reasons, logic. Last one. You'll never be satisfied in life if you don't seize this opportunity. Do you want to live the rest of your years yearning to know what would have happened if you just jumped when you had the chance? Question mark. So it's asking a question. It's very personal and it's emotional. So it is pathos. Great. There will be stuff on the quiz, probably the next quiz with ethos, pathos, and logos. So this is something, and you know, it's not that you really want to memorize this so much, but if you can have that in your head when you're trying to appeal to someone, when you're trying to persuade someone in one of our essays, especially, but anytime, if you can use emotion to some extent, if you can use a little bit of credibility, reputation, whether your own by the way that you write or your storytelling, or bringing in outside sources, experts to quote, that's a good way to bring in ethos to your paper. And finally, centering that paper around good reasons or logic. And that is all we have. So again, as always, if you have any questions, send me an email, and I look forward to hearing from you and reading your work over the next few days.